Hey everybody, welcome to Acrylics Made Easy. Today we're going to paint an ocean sunset. Let's go. Over here we've got our golden fluid acrylics, Hansa yellow, vat orange, quinacridone magenta, ultramarine blue, Payne's gray, and burnt umber light. And this is titanium white. I have two puddles on my palette of that, one for mixing warm colors, one for mixing cool colors. And here we go. Let's get started with a filbert brush. And I want to sketch a couple lines on this canvas with a nice light color. So I'm going to get some white and a little bit of orange. And just use that to sketch some lines on the canvas. Over here on the canvas, this top piece of tape this is a 16 by 20 inch canvas. The top piece of tape is set at 7 inches. And this lower piece of tape is at 11 inches here and 9 inches here, in case you're following along at home and you want to put tape in the same spot. And that's going to be the horizon up here, and this is going to be the top of a wave right here. So we're just kind of blocking out areas of color, making it nice and easy to make a flat horizon for ourselves. And this is, like I said, going to be the top of a wave coming across, but we're going to play around with the shape of that. The line that I want to sketch on here is for the foam, the front edge of the foam, and I just want to give it sort of an interesting shape like that with some up and down sort of swoops. And then up here in the sky, I might as well start sketching a couple lines too. I'm going to have some clouds sitting a little bit above the horizon, and I kind of want them to have this slightly diagonal shape to where they break up. Alright, something about like that. I know it doesn't look like much right now, but it's giving me a map for where the color is going to go. You'll see in a sec. So let's go back to the palette, clean that brush out a little bit, set it aside. I want to get something bigger to get started. I'm going to go ahead and grab this big filbert. This is a number 50 filbert, made by Simply Simmons. These are really cheap for how long they last and what a good job they do. Something about 20 bucks, I think, for a brush like this. Alright, loading up some white paint first, just for right in the brightest part of the sunset. I'm just going to start with some of that. And the reason I'm putting white paint on the white canvas is so I have something to softly blend into. So let's go back to our palette. Grab a little bit of yellow, and then back at the canvas here, I've got that white paint on there. I can just easily put a little bit of yellow around whatever spot I decide is going to be the brightest part of the sun, and I can just blend around that real easy, given that I've already got that wet white paint there. So that'll be sort of the brightest part of the sunset, and we'll just start getting a little darker around that. Let's grab a little bit of orange. A little bit of yellow too, just to keep it nice and bright. And I'm just going to go around the color we just laid on there. Maybe bring it along right at the base of the horizon there. And I'm going to leave this bright white and leave the yellow right around it. So I'm just going to carefully sort of blend the orange into the yellow while leaving a nice bit of that for the bright part of the sunset. And I'm just going to start working my way up a little bit with some loose brush strokes, sort of roughly following that map I laid out for myself. And let's get some magenta on here. I'm going to give this brush a little bit of a wipe. A little dip. Grab some magenta and white. Let's put some of that on our canvas. Just sort of filling in some of these spaces where I've left it open. Sticking to the right hand side with this color right now. I want to go ahead and fill in the spaces so I don't have any open canvas right here yet, or anymore. And now I'm going to go a little darker as I get up into the top of the canvas. So maybe wipe this brush off just a little bit. I'm not going to dip it this time, just wipe it a little bit and then grab some ultramarine blue, a little bit of white. And let's go a little higher now on these clouds. Now, acrylic paint does dry very fast, but you can get a nice blend going if you have a big soft brush like this and you do it within a few minutes of putting the paint on the canvas. So I've kind of got the color going somewhat diagonally up that way, but I'm bringing a couple of long clouds out this way into the sky too. Alright, I think that's looking pretty nice. Now let's put some color in this area over here. Back to my palette, I'm going to give this brush a little bit of a rinse. Wipe it off a little bit. And I want to go into a little bit of a different color here. I want to start with some white and let's get a little bit of yellow. And then a tiny bit of this blue. Alright, I want to use that color right there. We're going to orange leaves off on the left hand side of this big cloud bank. Putting this kind of light blue that has a tiny, or it's like yellow with a tiny bit of blue in it basically. It's more yellow and white than anything, but it has just a hint of blue. Then we're going to get a little bit more blue as we work our way up. So now I'm going to grab a little bit more blue and white. Okay, now we have less yellow going, more just blue and white. Still pretty light. And where we left off, filling in this empty space, I'm going to use this color now. And I might just actually bring this color all the way to the top in those empty spaces. Right, pretty good. Now it's nice to kind of punch a couple sky holes through these clouds. So you just use that color you got on your brush for the background over here and break up these clouds just a little bit. So I just have a couple real small ones here and there. Alright. Not bad. Let's maybe cut a little bit into this brighter part here. Alright, that's pretty nice. Let's start working on the ocean. So, back to the palette. I'm going to just give this brush a little bit of a wipe. A little dip, and set it aside. Then we're going to go over to our canvas and peel the tape off for our horizon. Okay, nice and straight horizon. We're going to let that dry a little bit, and we're actually going to tape off and paint up to it with our ocean. So let's work a little bit down here. We can go ahead and paint from the tape here up close to the horizon while we're waiting for that little bit to dry. So let's do that. Coming back to my palette, I'm going to get some ultramarine blue and white. And I'm going to mix a little bit of magenta into that. I want to put that just right above this long diagonal piece of tape here. I'll go ahead and work it up toward the horizon, just about like that. We can go ahead and peel this tape off. Now that we've got our or diagonal line sort of established for that. Okay. And then we can go down to the bottom here. Go ahead and throw this color across the front edge of this foam that's going to be rolling up the wet sand. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and fill this in with this same color. And just sort of fade it out as you get up towards that diagonal line. Something about like that. Perfect. Nicely set up for the next step on that. That's also going to dry a little bit before we do our next step. So let's come down into what's going to be the wet sand area right here. Go ahead and clean this brush out a little bit. Love this big brush. Now let's get some bright color going again. A little bit of yellow, a little bit of white, a little bit of orange. Nice and bright. A little more yellow. Oh, that's nice right there. So we want a nice bright reflection on the wet sand right here in front of the foam edge. So I'm going to start with this real bright yellow-orange color, like that. We're just going to fade it out around that into darker wet sand. So let's go back to our palette. A little more orange and get some magenta on there. All right. Something about like that. So I want to leave, right under the brightest part of the sunset, I want to leave that area that's, you know, the lightest color. And I'm just going to work around it with this next color I've just mixed. Again, I want to try to line up the brightest part here with the brightest part up there. So I'm just sort of working in from either side. And since I just put that other color on there, I can get a pretty smooth blend of color around that. And now let's get darker around the edges of that. All right. Let's get some ultramarine blue, some white, and a little bit of Payne's gray. Payne's gray, if you're not familiar, is just a nice bluish gray color that's very helpful to have on the palette, I think. Okay. So, just coming in from the sides with this bluish gray tone now. I want that bright part to stay bright, so I'm just going to carefully blend that in there. Carefully blend this out a little bit right here. Now be careful how far you bring that dark color over into the bright. You don't want to bring it into the super bright part of the middle, at least right now. But that's pretty good for now. Let's start working on the sand in front of that. So for the sand in front of that, we want to get into this brown. So that's the old, burnt umber light right there. And I'm just adding it to the color I already had on the brush, which is white and blue and a little bit of Payne's gray. And let's fill in sort of the dry part of the sand here. Okay. That's a good start for that part. We're going to come back and do some other stuff right there, but we're going to leave that for now and come back up to the horizon. So, over here, get this brush, another little rinse, and I think we might actually be done with this brush for now. So, I'm going to set it aside and grab this 1/4 inch flat brush. Oops, dropping it. Alright, so we got a 3/4 inch flat brush, and we're going to start painting with that. But first, I'm going to tape off that horizon. So, The paint above the horizon is mostly dry. It's just a little bit tacky. Now this works best if you wait like to the next day or something when it's super, super dry. But you can do it when it's just tacky. I'm just gonna tape off the lower part of the sky so I can paint the water right up to that and have a nice solid horizon without having to work too hard at it. Okay. Now the key here is to make sure that you have a little bit of that sky color showing under the tape all the way across. There's not any part where you can't see the sky color. That way you know when you paint the water up to this line, you won't have a gap. Alright, like I said, this works a little better if you wait for that paint to dry completely. But I'm just going to go for it right now. So I want a little bit lighter color, some magenta and white, basically, for right under the bright part of the sunset. So let's go over here and mix some magenta and white. And then right here, under the brightest part of the sunset, I'm just going to go across. You see I'm kind of holding the tape down with one finger, which you wouldn't have to do if you waited longer, but it helps to hold it in place and keep the paint from drifting up under there. I'm just going to fill it in and just blend that color down into the sort of purpley blue underneath. Oh, that's going to be nice. All right. Now let's do the same thing on this side over here. We're just going to start with a little darker color. So I've got that magenta and white. I'm just going to bring some over here and mix it with a little bit of this blue. Something about like that. Let's do that. So again, I'm just going to hold the tape with my finger, keep it in place, and just work my way across the rest of the horizon, blending it down into the bluish purple color beneath. I'm just going to pull the tape and see how we did. Alright, not bad at all. Okay, let's put a little texture back there. So we want to take that from being sort of a flat looking ocean surface to something that has a little bit of movement. So we've got our Payne's gray, a little bit of ultramarine blue, a little bit of magenta. We're going to make a dark sort of grayish purple. And just above this diagonal line here, we'll start with sort of some of the boldest of this texture I'm going to put on there. I'm just dragging the flat brush across, putting some horizontal marks on there that, you know, they kind of want to crisscross sometimes. Sometimes they sit on their own like that. They're mostly horizontal, but I'm not worried about if they go up and down a little bit. And then as I get higher up on the ocean, I want these lines to get closer together, but lighter too. So it's nice to start at the bottom, and then basically as you paint, as the paintbrush runs out of paint, you start making lighter and lighter marks. And then they get a little straighter too as they get up towards the horizon. Most of the movement, up and down movement, is evident closer to you. And the further away you get, straighter these lines get. And I want to get on either side, but sort of leave a little bit of space right under the brightest part of the sunset, because we're going to switch colors for that part. Alright, I like that. So like I said, we're going to switch our colors up for right under the brightest part of the sunset here. Let's go back to our palette. Give this brush a little bit of a white. We're going to rinse. And I want some bright color now, so I want some white and yellow, a little bit of orange. Something about like that. And right below the brightest part of the sunset, I'm going to do some texture with this bright color I've just mixed. So basically the same thing where I have horizontal marks that I'm doing. Some of them are going to sort of crisscross the others. Some of them just sort of sit on their own. I want to vary the length of them. Some of them should be really short, almost little dots. We're just bringing that light down. Let's get a little bit brighter right in the center. So over here at the palette, get some of this white and yellow, sort of just white and yellow on its own. Just add that right in the center. Just using the corner of this brush to put some bright dots. Okay, I think that's pretty good. Let's work on this wave right here. Okay. Getting that brush washed out. And we're going to get some dark color to carve the top of that wave. Payne's gray with a little bit of that burnt umber mixed in. So, I'm going to follow this line, but instead of trying to make it perfectly straight, I'm going to give it some character, give it a little bit of up and down movement. Okay. Now, right in front of this bright part of the sunset, I'm going to put a little bit of light through that wave, so I'm just going to leave some space for where the light's going to be and paint around sort of underneath it. And then on the right hand side of the wave, I'm just going to close that space in because the light's only going to come through right here. Alright, it's looking pretty good. On the bottom edge of this wave, I just want to sort of blend out that color. So I'm just turning the brush so that it's half on the dark color, half on the light color. Trying to get rid of that edge if you can. And then we'll do a few lines that sort of drag out of the wave. This slight diagonal down to the right. Okay, pretty good. Now let's work on the foam edge at the bottom of the water here. I want some more of that same dark color. That's Payne's gray and burnt umber. But I'm going to add a little bit of, add a little bit of magenta to that, just for some flavor. Let's go along the bottom edge of the foam. Then a little line. Helps give that foam edge a feeling of some volume if you have a nice little shadow underneath it. So let's add a little bit more paint to the brush and sort of reinforce that a little bit, especially over here on the right. Keep that edge nice and dark right there. And then we want to leave some room for a nice fluffy foamy edge here and start adding some texture on the other side of it. So I'm sort of imagining where that foam edge is and coming out from behind where it's going to be with some shadows like this. Rather than sort of defining it with its own dark line following that shape, I'm just going to, like I said, sort of imagine where the top of it's going to be, start behind that. And we'll put a few more sort of broken up little shadows in there too. Alright, pretty good. Let's get back up to the wave and put some bright color in it. Give this brush a little rinse, a little wipe. Okay, let's get some bright color for the center. I'm going to get a bright green, so a bunch of yellow, a little tiny bit of blue. Keep it nice and bright. That'll do nicely. And right in the center of this bright part here, just throw it on there. The paint around it is just a little bit wet, so it lends itself nicely to blending that out. I don't want to blend over too far, but you know, a couple little hints going over that way isn't a bad thing. Beautiful. Let's put a little bit of foam on the top edge of that. Okay. So we'll take this brush and give it a little white. Alright, that's pretty good. Let's get a different brush for the foam. Let's try a fan brush. Okay. Get some white, ultramarine blue. Something about like that. We'll leave this top edge as it is. I really like how sort of crisp it looks. And just over here we'll start giving a little bit of a little curling edge there. So you see I kind of carved it by holding it one way and then turned it the other way to sort of give it a little bit more texture. You know, you can pull the brush up off of there, get a little sense of movement. I don't like to do too much of a pattern, so I'll do that a couple times and I'll sort of break it up. You know, with the edge of the brush. Alright, pretty good. Let's get in here and put a little highlight on the top of that foam edge right there. So with that same color, get some more of that white and ultramarine blue. Plenty of white in there. Just going to come across top edge where this foam is rolling up. And what I like to do is sort of establish that highlight all the way across and then find a few spots where you can sort of drag it back and break it up. Because you don't want it to feel like it's sitting out there on its own. It's part of this greater area of foam. It's just where it's rolling up. So once you've established sort of that top edge, come back and break it up a couple spots. And then I'll just throw a couple more little highlights in here just for more movement. Using that same blue and white. Alright, I like that. Now let's put some bright highlights in the water right here. So I'll give this brush a little bit of a rinse. I think I'll set it aside and go back to that 3/4 inch flat. So I want some nice bright color. Yellow and orange, a little bit of white. That'll do nicely. And let's take this color right here. And we'll find a few spots. What I like to do is find some of these dark lines and go right below them. With this bright color on there, just in a few spots. These long horizontal brush strokes. And if you go right below the dark line, it has the effect of that foam rolling over and showing a spot where the clear water is reflecting the sunlight. It's a nice little effect. So again, I got a nice dark line right here. If I come over to my palette and get some more of that paint, that bright orange and yellow with a little bit of white, right under that shadow right there. I'm gonna get a little bit more, a little thicker paint on there. Sometimes you gotta lay it on twice to get it just to have as much as you want on there. Yeah, I think that's pretty nice. Okay, now this foam edge needs just a little bit more work, so let's get back on that. Brush a little bit. What I want is a nice dark tone for the bottom of where it's rolling over. So I'm mixing some ultramarine blue and some Payne's gray basically with a tiny bit of white. And right above the darkest part of the shadow, I'm going to bring this color across. Okay. Now, I don't want it to be too solid of a line, and this brush tends to make pretty solid lines, just its nature. I like to throw the paint on there with this and then soften it with a different brush. So I'm going to come back with this round, this is a number 6 round brush, and just go right over where those two colors are meeting. And you can just roll that edge. Roll those two colors together a little bit. And it doesn't have to be like perfectly uniform. It's nice to have a little bit of just sort of variation, some spots where it gets a little darker, some spots where it's a little lighter. And you can even use just the corner of the brush to put a couple little dark bubbles into the foam right on the very edge. Once you've shaped it. It's nice to do all the shaping first and then come back and just add a little bit of texture like this. Okay, let's work a little bit more on that wet sand, and this painting will be just about done. Okay, giving this brush a little rinse here. Now, I want the bright part of the sun's reflection on the wet sand to be super, super bright. So I'm going to get some white paint and just a tiny bit of yellow. Start with that right now. And just right below the brightest part of the sun, where it's reflecting here, on the wet sand, I'm just going to put some of this bright white and yellow, and then sort of letting the brush sort of bounce around a little bit. Let it dissipate, go from a sort of a solid line to more broken up, and then start getting real light with the tip of the brush and just getting some sort of sparkles that come out from the center of that light. Alright, that's pretty nice. Now let's get a little bit of that going on right here in the water above it. Okay, so just adding to the orange that I've got there already, putting some white highlights into that, just to really make it pop. Alright, pretty nice. Now we need to work on just that wet sand edge. So we're going to go back to our palette, clean this brush a little bit. I'm going to get some ultramarine blue and white. And just along the edge of where the wet sand meets the dry sand, I'm going to just draw a line, paint a line of this color I've just mixed, which is ultramarine blue and white. I'm going to get a little bit more paint on the brush. Same color, ultramarine blue and white, on this number 6 round brush that I'm using. And just going across again, just to make sure there's plenty of paint on there. And then I'm just going to sort of blend out that color using this brush first. Spread it out a little bit, and then I'm going to get a different brush, which is this filbert, this number 6 filbert brush. And without putting any paint on it, I'm just going to blend out that light color we just mixed, that ultramarine blue and white. Sort of blend it out over the rest of these colors we've already got on there. I don't want to cover them up completely, but just bring it up a little bit here. And then you can grab a little bit this white and yellow and sort of pull it out in some little streaks here. Leaving some little round dots too. Those are nice. Just gonna give it that sparkle. Okay, I want to get a little bit brighter on the front edge of that. I'm just gonna continue using this filbert right now. So ultramarine blue and white with my filbert brush. And now that I've got that sort of faded out part, how I like it, I'm just gonna make the front edge of that a little bit more solid and maybe give it a little bit more shape too here. And then sort of fade out again into that color that I've already got above. You know, it never hurts to grab a dry brush or a brush that doesn't have paint on it like this. You can take this 3/4 inch flat now and just sort of work that together. Okay. Now this bottom edge, I like it to be sharper than where it fades out above, but I don't want it to be that sharp, so I'm going to come across that now and just soften up that edge a little bit. Try not to lose too much of the color. And finally, I think we'll make the sand a little bit darker right here in the corner. So, a little bit of burnt umber, mixed with some Payne's gray and a little bit of that magenta. And just come right to the corner with that, fade it out, up towards the edge of the wet and dry sand. Beautiful. All right, folks, we're going to call this painting done. All right, I want to thank you for joining me. Make sure to like and subscribe to Acrylics Made Easy, and we'll paint some more soon. Thanks, folks.